Today, we are going to talk about chapter 22 in the Smart Sales System, which is getting around gatekeepers. And this is a really important area to take a step back and try to improve your skills and improve your tactics. One reason why is because if you were to do an hour of hardcore power phone prospecting, the most likely outcomes of the dials you make are you're going to deal with gatekeepers and you're going to deal with voicemails. And then a small sliver of that time is actually talking to prospects. So because so much of your day and of your phone prospecting time will be dealing with gatekeepers, if you can just slightly improve your competence in this one area, you can see immediate and big improvements in your overall sales results in terms of getting into accounts, generating leads. And so that's what we're here today to talk to you about. We're going to provide you with some gatekeeper tips. We're going to talk about some of the most common gatekeeper objections and give you actual responses to those objections. We'll talk about a couple different types of gatekeepers that you're going to run into so you can recognize which type of gatekeeper you're interacting with and have more clarity around what to do. And then we'll wrap up with just a couple thoughts on your mindset when you're dealing day in and day out with difficult gatekeepers. And that's all we'll talk about here today. So let's just jump right in and talk about some gatekeeper tips. The first tip is to take a step back and first try to understand the gatekeeper. One of the core concepts in the Smart Sales System is to understand the prospect that you're trying to sell to. By understanding the prospect, you will improve your ability to sell to the prospect. So if we're trying to get around the gatekeeper, the first step is let's try to understand the gatekeeper and understand where they're coming from. And when you're dealing with a difficult gatekeeper that's blocking you and trying to do everything they can to keep you out and not let you in, the first thing to keep in mind is that most gatekeepers have been assigned the objective to keep salespeople out. If they identify that a salesperson is cold calling, it's their job to not let that salesperson through. And the reason why they've been given this task is a lot of times the target prospect that you're trying to reach is getting called by a lot of salespeople. So what that target prospect will do is they'll tell the gatekeeper when it's a salesperson and they're cold calling, don't let them through. And they do that to protect their time. It's very understandable. This does not mean you shouldn't cold call and that you can't get through. It's just something to be aware of when you're dealing with a difficult gatekeeper. And because they've been given the task to keep salespeople out, they've often been trained how to identify when a cold caller or someone calling in is a salesperson. And so a lot of times what they'll do is they'll ask you questions like, what is this in regards to? That question is more designed to get you to raise your flag that indeed you are a salesperson so that they know not only is it okay to get rid of you, but they should get rid of you because they might get in trouble if they let you in. A lot of times when they're trying very hard to keep you out, it's because they could actually get in trouble if you slip past them. If they've been told, don't let salespeople in, and then you get through and get on the phone with the target prospect, they could look bad in terms of their job performance and what they've been assigned to do. And those are some of the reasons why gatekeepers can be so difficult. And because of all of those, they actually naturally take an adversarial role to you. You've been assigned the task to sell into certain accounts. They've been given the task to keep salespeople out. So this kind of puts you at opposite ends of what you're both trying to achieve. And it's almost a zero-sum game here. If you were to be successful, it means they're not being successful. If they're being successful, it means you're not being successful. And that creates a very challenging situation. The last thing to keep in mind with the gatekeeper is that most of the time, their job is extremely hectic and probably not a lot of fun. If you can just picture a gatekeeper, especially like a front desk receptionist, the phone is ringing all day. A lot of those calls are from salespeople like you that are cold calling, that are trying to get past them, and they have to do everything they can to not let those people pass. In addition to that, there's deliveries coming in that need to be checked in. There's employees coming in and out that might have requests. So it's very hectic, might not pay a lot. And the only reason I throw this out there is that this is just something to keep in mind when you're dealing with that difficult gatekeeper. It's easy for the gatekeeper to be difficult, then for you to start being difficult back to them and start getting frustrated. Keeping this last thought in mind can just help you to have a little bit more patience and understanding for what they're doing and why they're doing it. And that can help position you to have more success with dealing with gatekeepers. But if you look at all of those things and you understand where the gatekeeper is coming from, it's pretty clear that one of the last things you want to do is sound like a salesperson. If you sound like a salesperson, they're not only going to try harder to get rid of you, but they are going to know that it's okay to get rid of you, that they don't really have much to worry worry about. And so when you add up all of those things and you really understand where the gatekeeper is coming from, it's pretty clear that you should do everything you can to minimize how much you sound like a salesperson. And that when you let the gatekeeper know that indeed you're a salesperson that might be calling, trying to sell something, they'll not only know that it's okay to get rid of you, but they'll know that they need to get rid of you, that if you slip past them and you bother the person that they're the gatekeeper for, they could actually get in trouble. And one thing that they will do to try to figure out, are you a salesperson? They'll ask you questions to figure out why you're calling. And that's why they may ask questions like, what is this call in regards to? If you honestly answer those questions around what your call is in regards to, you might say something like, well, I'm calling to introduce myself and our company. I'm calling to schedule a meeting or appointment. I'm trying to learn about what your needs are. I'm trying to see if you need what I sell. I'm calling to share details about what I sell and about my company. If you say anything close to any of those, you will indeed let the gatekeeper know you're a salesperson and they will know that they need to get rid of you. So you want to avoid saying any of those or communicating anything close to that, and we will show you how to do that coming up. The next tip is to try to enlist their help. And I actually want to pause right here. I want to let you know, we're going to give you a few gatekeeper tips here, and none of these are really like silver bullets that if you do this, then you never have to worry about the gatekeeper and it's going to be just smooth sailing. These are just small, easy to implement tactics that over a large number of calls, they can improve your ability to get around and diffuse the gatekeeper and decrease the level of guardedness. But none of these by no means are just some simple do this and it solves everything. So this tip is to try to enlist their help. This is basically communicating in a way where if your gatekeeper isn't yet in full-on blocking, get rid of this person mode, it might encourage them to be a little bit more helpful or feel like they need to help you a little bit more. And what you might do is you might start out with, before asking to connect with whoever you're asking for or asking who to connect with, you might start out by saying something like, maybe you can help me with this. I'm trying to reach the IT director and I'm having trouble finding out who that is. Maybe you can point me in the right direction. I usually work with the VP of HR and I don't see that person on your website. Or I'm not really sure who to speak with. I have down Mary Thomas as the VP of technology, but I think that she's no longer there. Can you point me in the right direction of her replacement? Or I might need your help on this one. I'm struggling to find this particular person. Can you point me in the right direction? These are just examples of how to communicate in a way where you're encouraging and coaching the gatekeeper to be a little bit more helpful, or that you need your help. And if they almost feel sorry for you a little bit, they might help you. They still might be difficult. They still might block you. But this is just one small tactic to try. The next tactic is to try to treat the gatekeeper like the prospect. So this is a really key tactic to use when you are starting to feel like, okay, this gatekeeper is not letting me in. And the logic here is that you're calling, trying to get to the prospect, you're trying to get around the gatekeeper. If it looks like you're not going to be able to accomplish either of those things, just start to treat the gatekeeper like the prospect. Let me show you what that looks like. So if this was your cold call script, this is what we actually showed you in a previous training module on cold calling. But if this was your cold call script that you were going to try to use once you're on the phone with the target prospect, if the gatekeeper is blocking you, well, then you can just start to work through some of these sections with the gatekeeper, and I'll show you what that looks like. Before I do that, and I show you what these responses might look like when you tweak them for the gatekeeper, I want to take a step back because I'm going to actually use a real example here to show you what the cold call script will look like. And what we did in a previous training module on building your sales message, we went through a process and we used an example product of web design services, and we went through a process to map out all the key details about that service, some benefits, some pain points, some pain questions, current state questions, and a name drop example. And when we went through those steps and developed that message, that allowed us to create building blocks. If all of this is new to you, I would encourage you to go back to a training module on how to build your sales message. And once you have those building blocks, you can then use those to create your cold call script. And we talked about that in a previous training module on cold calling. But once we have that cold call script, now we're being blocked by the gatekeeper and we can't get to the prospect to use our cold call script, well, at this point, we might just start to treat the gatekeeper like the prospect. And that might look something like this. We start out with our value points. Actually, let me take a step back and let you know why I'm calling. The reason for my call is that we help small businesses to increase the revenue they generate through their website and improve website conversion rates. I don't know if you all want to improve those areas, and that's why I'm calling. Do you know who the best person for me to connect with? Or do you know how I can get connected with Mrs. Thomas? That's a way to basically using your value points building block to try to educate the gatekeeper on why it is you're calling. If those are ways that you truly help, that communicates to the gatekeeper why it makes sense for that person to let you through. Now, I'm not saying that this is going to make them drop their guard and go, oh, well, you didn't say that. If in that case, let me pass you through. But it is an additional tactic. I mean, before you try this, you're getting blocked and you're not going anywhere. So it's an additional tactic for you to use. You can use other portions of your call script in the exact same way. So instead of going to your value points, you could go to your pain points, and that might look like, actually, let me take a step back and let you know who I am and why I'm calling. A lot of businesses that we work with are having trouble generating revenue through their website and converting website visitors. I don't know if you're concerned about those areas, and that's why I'm reaching out. Do you know who the best person for me to connect with? Do you know if your marketing is concerned about those areas? You could also go to a name drop example. Actually, let me take a step back and let you know who I am and why we're calling. We worked with an accounting firm similar to you guys, help them to improve how they told their story through their website. After only 6 months, we increased their leads by 500% and their revenue by 20%. I don't know if we can help you guys in the same way, and that's why I'm calling. Do you know who best for me to connect with? You could also go to paying questions. Now, remember, what we're trying to do is we're trying to get on the phone with the target prospect to ask some questions. If we can't ask the prospect our questions, let's just ask the gatekeeper our questions. Okay, well, maybe you can answer this for me. Do you know how important is it for you guys to improve website traffic? Or how important is it for you guys to improve your conversion rates? Now, by the way, I'm not saying these are perfect questions for the example here or good questions for you, but the point here is if you can't get to the prospect to ask your questions, just start asking the gatekeeper. And by the way, you're not necessarily looking for the gatekeeper to answer the question, although you could get maybe some valuable information out of the gatekeeper. But basically, at this point, the gatekeeper may answer your question, and then you could follow up with another question, or the gatekeeper might not know the answer to your question. If they don't know the answer to your question, that's great. The gatekeeper might say, I have no idea. Oh, I see. Well, that's the reason why I'm calling. That's usually something that the business owner cares a lot about, and we have very productive conversations, and that's why I'm reaching out. Do you know how I could get connected with Mr. Wilson in order to talk about your website conversion rates? So again, whether or not my wording there is perfect or not, the flow there is important, which is the gatekeeper's blocking you. Just ask them the questions you want to ask your prospect. Maybe they have some good information for you. Maybe they don't. And whatever they say, you can then follow up with either follow-up questions or trying to close for a justification for talking with the prospect. You could do the exact same thing with current state questions. Oh, well, maybe you might know the answer to this. Do you know if you guys are currently working with a web design agency? So same exact process there. The next tip is to display social proof. And social proof is basically establishing a level of authority or credibility by surrounding yourself with other people of authority. So I'll give you an example. Let's say you're at a networking event and you're spending a lot of time talking with and hanging around the hosts of the event or the speaker at the event. When other people see you talking to those individuals, you will be displaying social proof. Regardless of what you're talking about to those people, it's just the visible sight that you are connected to those people of authority increases your level of credibility and authority, and that is displaying social proof. Now, what you could do is you could use that same concept when you're cold calling and dealing with a gatekeeper, and you could do that by communicating who else in the organization you are talking to or have met with. That might look something like, oh, I spoke with Tom Jones in accounting, and now I'm trying to reach someone in HR. Do you know who the best person for me to connect with is? So that's basically demonstrating that you're already engaged in talking to Tom Jones, and by doing that, you are establishing social proof. And this is incredibly effective at decreasing the gatekeeper's guardedness. Not only does this make you look less like an outsider and more like an insider, but when you show that you're already engaged with the business or the company, then then the gatekeeper may be more reluctant to just blow you off and block you out, because they don't want to be very rude and shut you down. If they think that you're already talking to someone in the organization, they will feel an obligation to be nicer to you and more supportive to you. So this is extremely effective. And although you may see that and say, oh, that's great, I could see how that works and that's great, but a lot of times when I'm calling, I haven't spoken to anyone yet, and that's very reasonable. One small tweak you can do here is that if you haven't spoken to anyone, you could just let the gatekeeper know who you're planning to meet with. So if you're planning on talking to HR and accounting, and you know that Tom Jones works in accounting, most likely you haven't spoken yet to Tom Jones. You could say something like this: hi, yeah, I'm planning to meet with Tom Jones in the next couple months. Before I do that, I want to reach out to someone in HR. Do you know who the best person for me to connect with there? And so what I did there, I haven't met with Tom Jones, and I'm not lying by saying I've met with Tom Jones. I'm just saying I'm planning to meet with Tom Jones. And whether or not I have a meeting on the calendar, I'm not really saying that I do. So it's up to the gatekeeper to interpret whether or not that meeting is scheduled or what my level of interaction with Tom Jones is. I don't really feel like that's being manipulative or dishonest. You are planning to talk with Tom Jones, so you're being honest, and it's up to the gatekeeper. But it's a small tweak on this tactic that can help you to establish social proof. Another tactic is to mention an initiative. An example of this might be, let's say you do some research and on a company, you find out through a press release or on the company's website or financial documents that there's some sort of initiative. You could say something like this to the gatekeeper: hey, yes, I'm calling to discuss the initiative to consolidate distribution channels. Can you help me get connected with the director of operations? So by mentioning an initiative, you can decrease how much you look like an outsider and you look more like an insider. Just a small tweak and tactic. Good places to go to find initiatives are look on the company's website, press releases, news articles, look in their financial documents. If you can't find anything, there's a lot of common initiatives, like initiative to cut costs or to streamline operations or to improve sales, so decrease costs of goods sold. You could almost pick a generic initiative that just about every company has. And when you say that to a gatekeeper, it will sound like you're somewhat connected with the organization. You can always try to befriend the gatekeeper. And this isn't real, rocket science here, but the more difficult you are with the gatekeeper, the more difficult the gatekeeper may be with you. So the more friendly you are with a gatekeeper, possibly the more friendly the gatekeeper will be with you. A couple just small tips here. One is you could try catching the gatekeeper's name, and you could either do this before they start being difficult. Oh, by the way, I didn't catch your name, or, oh, what was your name? And then after you get their name, you use their name when you're talking to them. It can help to establish rapport. Another thing you could do is just try to smile while you're talking to them. We all know that dealing with gatekeepers can be frustrating. When you get frustrated, you can start to hear that in your voice, and you can start to try harder to get in. The gatekeeper will try harder to block you out, and you both take your natural adversarial roles. Well, when you smile, you sound warmer, could warm the gatekeeper up, and you may take just small steps to be less adversaries, and maybe that might improve your odds of getting in. This is a last tip and tactic on dealing with the gatekeeper, and this is one to use when you really have no other options. The gatekeeper is clearly blocking you out, not going to let you in, and you're really about to walk away. And one small thing that you could do is to let the gatekeeper know that you understand their situation. Maybe soften them a little bit, and that might look something like, I understand the situation you're in. You get calls all day from salespeople, and it's your job to not let bothersome salespeople through. I can tell you I'm not one of those annoying salespeople. I'll be very respectful of the CFO's time, and there's a very good chance that we'll likely have a very productive conversation, because we help CFOs to decrease the price per unit, decrease the cost of goods sold, and decrease the time that they spend dealing with reporting. Do you know what the best way for me to connect with Mary Wilson is? So not going to work every time, but it's one last thing that you can try before you walk away. The last tip is to just try to avoid the gatekeeper altogether. Gatekeepers are difficult, so if you can't get around a gatekeeper, you may want to do what you can to call when they're not there. So good hours to call when the gatekeeper's not there are 7 to 8, 12 to 1 when they're at lunch, and 5 to 6. Usually if you're calling executives that have gatekeepers answering their phone, these are hours when the gatekeeper's not in yet or they're not there, and either the executive or business owner may answer their own phone, or you may get an auto attendant that you can dial the keypad to get to the to the target prospect. So it's one additional thing for you to try. Now let's talk about gatekeeper objections. And there's very common objections that you get from gatekeepers, and they're always usually the same. What is this in regards to? Is this a sales call? We're not interested. We're not making any changes right now. We already use someone for that. We do not need that right now. Send me your information. Let's talk about each of these one at a time, starting with what is this in regards to? Is this a sales call? These are basically the same thing. And it's basically the gatekeeper trying to identify what are you calling about. More than them caring about what you're calling about, they want to know, are you a salesperson that's calling trying to sell something? And this is a really good question to ask to screen that, because like I said before, any honest or direct answer as to why you're calling will let them know that you're a salesperson, and then they know that they can get rid of you. So we don't want to answer with that, but I don't want you to be dishonest. I don't want you to be manipulative in any way. So one option you have is, instead of saying what it's in regards to, such as I'm calling to schedule an appointment, you can deflect to your value points. And that might look something like this. Well, the reason for my call is we help small businesses to increase the revenue they generate through their website and improve their website conversion rates. And you just sit there, because you just stop after that, because you're answering their question. They say, what's this in regards to? That's what it's in regards to. And you're not lying there, because those are improvements that you help to make. And you're calling to try to make those improvements. Now, of course, you sell something in order to make those improvements, but it's a little bit of a curveball for the gatekeeper. They're looking for something that's glaringly obvious that you're a salesperson, and this is less obvious. So a gatekeeper may still block you out with that, but it's going to be less reflexive for them. They may either have to think a little bit, they may have to ask you another question, maybe they let you through, but it keeps you alive when they ask that very difficult question of what is this in regards to? Other very common objections are the gatekeeper says, we're not interested, we're not making any changes, we already use someone for that. By the way, when the gatekeeper gives these objections, most of the time they are not incredibly informed. They are just saying these to get rid of you. They might not know in detail what they're using or what they're interested in or what they need. They just sense that you're a salesperson, and they're going to say one of these to try to get rid of you. So instead of just complying with that or trying to change them from not interested to interested, you can deflect to your pain questions. So you could say something like, oh, I understand. Well, I tell you what, if I could ask you real quick, do you know how important it is for you all to improve your website conversion rates? And so again, the gatekeeper may or may not know the answer to that question, and you might get an answer to that, get some valuable information. What you're looking for here is some sort of response to the question that you can then play off of to ask another question or to justify a meeting with the prospect, such as they say, I'm not sure, I have no idea. Okay, well, that's why I'm calling, and then you try to work around that. You can use your current state questions in the exact same way. So the gatekeeper says, we're already using someone for that. Oh, okay. If I could ask you real quick, do you know when the last time you refreshed your website was? So again, trying to stay alive by asking a question. You can deflect to your pain points. So they say something like, we're not making any changes right now. Oh, I understand. A lot of businesses that we work with are having challenges with, they have their websites aren't converting website visitors at a rate they need to. Do you know if the owner of the business is concerned about any of those? Another extremely common objection is when the gatekeeper says, can you send me your information? This is very popular because a gatekeeper can often use this objection and avoid looking like a bad person or avoid rejecting you. They may actually say this in a way where they give you a sense of hope. Oh, send me your information, I'll pass it along. When they do this, the worst thing you could do is then spend your valuable time crafting some beautiful message that you send over that most likely gets immediately deleted or does not get to the target prospect. So at some point you will have to send over your information. My advice would be, when you do send your information over, hopefully you have some sort of email template that you can send without wasting your time. But before you get to a point where you send your information, try to keep the conversation going. And you can do that with some sort of response like, sure, I can definitely do that. So I know what best to send you. Can I ask you real quick, do you need to increase website traffic or visitors? And so again, here, you're just trying to keep the conversation going, get information, maybe find a reason to ask a follow-up question, find a reason to justify meeting. So those are some of the most common objections and responses for each of those. Now let's talk about two different types of gatekeepers that you can run into. So there are two very different types of gatekeepers. One type is front desk receptionists. These are basically the lobby of an office building or the lobby of a company's office. There might be someone working at a desk that's answering the phone and greeting people that are walking through, front desk receptionist. The other type is an executive assistant. This is a gatekeeper that may answer the phone for a leadership team of a department. Like there could be an executive assistant for the operations department, and that executive assistant performs admin roles for the CFO, the VP of operations, as well as it could be the whole department, and also answers the phones for certain people. These are the two types of people that you will run into most often, and they're very different. So knowing what type of gatekeeper you're dealing with could impact how you deal with that gatekeeper. So let's talk about how these differ and what they look like. The front desk receptionist will typically have limited organization knowledge. So they may have access to a company directory. They may know who is in what role. So when you call, if you were to say someone by title, they might know who's in that role. But when it comes to what that person actually does or what that department does, their level of knowledge is fairly limited. This person might often have less experience and skills. So it could be more of an entry level or lower level type of position in the organization. And that's the type of person that you're dealing with. Because of those two factors, when you call in, and this person may have a clear objective to keep all salespeople out, when they sense that you're a salesperson, they're going to do what I call subjective screening. This is, if I know you're a salesperson, I'm going to block you, and it does not matter what you sell, what we use, what we need. I'm blocking all salespeople out, and there's nothing you can do to really talk me into letting me in. And that they're very subjective. It's, if you're a salesperson, I'm blocking you. This person also works in that chaotic environment that I was talking about. And that's important to understand so that you know when you're on the phone and you're trying to continue to talk to this person so that you know what they're dealing with. And it makes really staying on the phone with these people challenging. Now, the executive assistant is very different. This person will often have deep organizational knowledge because they've maybe been with the company for a long time, worked their way up the ladder, maybe worked in that department for a long time. They know what's going on in the department. They may know about initiatives. They may know about challenges, pain points, problems. They know what different people in the organization do in terms of roles and responsibilities. This is the type of person that may sit in on meetings and take notes, and they could even influence decisions on which vendors to go with when it comes time to pick between a few different vendors on making a purchase. This person often is very experienced and sophisticated. Like I said, they maybe have worked their way up the ladder. They are very competent and they are a gatekeeper, but by no means is this a low-level position. They could often be very well paid as an executive assistant. Now, this person, because of some of the things I've just discussed, they often may be more objective in their screening, which means they definitely do not want pesky salespeople getting through and bothering an executive that they're the gatekeeper for, but they may hear you out and may make a more informed decision on who you are and whether or not they should let you through. So if you make a good case, you could get through and get good advice from this gatekeeper. Also, because of their deep level of knowledge, this gatekeeper may actually be a good resource for you to extract information. A good example of this is you get on the phone with this gatekeeper. Sure, you may still try to get around them real quickly, but once you identify that they're blocking you a little bit and that they're an executive assistant, you may try to stay on the phone with them, may treat them like the target prospect, may actually go through your cold call script with the executive assistant, ask some of your pain questions, ask some of your current state questions. This can lead to a couple things in that not only can you get good information from the gatekeeper, and that information may enable you to build your case as to why you should talk to the prospect, or build your case as to why the prospect may actually ultimately buy from you, or you may actually disqualify the prospect based on the information you gather from the gatekeeper. You may identify from the gatekeeper that what you sell they recently bought and that they're not going to make a change for another 3 to 5 years. So it doesn't even make sense for you to meet with the target prospect. And by talking with the gatekeeper and getting that information, you just decreased wasting all of your time that you would spend emailing and calling that executive. The gatekeeper also may point you to a better person to contact. You may actually have the target prospect on your list and think that's the person that you should try to get a meeting with. But in reality, for what you sell and what you're trying to do, there might be a better person. Maybe it's someone even higher in the organization, lower, or in a different role. And the executive assistant can often be the person to clearly provide you with that information. And the executive assistant assistant, it's a much less chaotic type of environment. Picture an executive assistant maybe in a cube back in the department for the executive you're calling, or they may have an office. So this is a person that's busy definitely throughout the day, but you could get a few minutes of time talking to an executive assistant where it's very difficult to get that with a front desk receptionist. So when you look at these two gatekeepers, they're very different, and it's very helpful to know which one you're talking to. The front desk receptionist will typically be more of an obstacle that's difficult to get around, and you really have to work hard to get around them. The executive assistant, you could actually turn into more of an ally, more of a coach that you work with, and they could actually be helpful or part of your pursuit to try to get into the account. So definitely try to leverage the executive assistant when you can. The last thing I want to talk about is your mindset. And this is very important because, like I said, you could spend a lot of your day dealing with gatekeepers, and a lot of the gatekeepers you deal with can be difficult from what I discussed. And so one main thing I want to leave you with is to not take it personally, because basically what gatekeepers are doing is they're trying to shoot you down. They're trying to block you out. And basically that is rejection in one way or another. And rejection is never fun. Regardless of what someone rejects you about, it usually feels frustrating and can, mess with you. But what you should keep in mind is it has nothing to do with you. You may feel personally rejected when the gatekeeper says, we're not interested, and they treat you not nice. But the reality is what they're rejecting is they're rejecting the company you work for, or they're rejecting the product you sell. When they say we're not interested, they're saying we're not interested in your product. It has nothing to do with you as a salesperson or the job that you're doing or what you said there. So don't take it personally. And in fact, the gatekeeper is probably actually not accurate when they say we're not interested or we don't need what you sell. They probably don't even have enough information or knowledge to make that decision. They are just doing their job. They're doing their job that they've been assigned to keep salespeople out, and you let them know that you are a salesperson. So sometimes that's hard to avoid, but if you can do your part to decrease looking like a salesperson, you can minimize how much they block you out. But at the end of the day, when they block you out, they're just doing their job. In order for them to do their job, they're going to make it difficult for you to do your job. And keep in mind, when they're ugly or difficult to work with and not pleasant to talk to, their job is difficult and their job is unpleasant. So, and the helpful thing about keeping that in mind is that when you let gatekeepers get to you by dealing with difficult gatekeepers all day, it can impact your tonality. It can impact your mindset. And when you really keep in mind that they're just doing their job is difficult, and their job is not a lot of fun, it's more fun being a salesperson and making commissions. You both have similar challenges, but you're going to get paid a lot more, and your job is a lot more fun than their job is. Keep that in mind and use that to help you to keep smiling and being friendly when you're dealing with them, even as unfriendly as they could end up being with you. So that's pretty much it. Some key takeaways here. Start by trying to understand the prospect, understand what they're trying to do, why they're trying to do it. Because you understand what they're doing, why they're trying to do it, it's very key to minimize how much you look like a salesperson. If you can't get around the gatekeeper and get to the target prospect, heck, just start treating like the gatekeeper like the target prospect. Start asking them your questions and use that to either get valuable information out of the gatekeeper or use their answers to justify your reason to get around the gatekeeper. And don't try to deal with their objections head on. Deflect their objections to keep their call going. Try to find a way to get around the gatekeeper. And at the end of the day, don't let difficult gatekeepers get to you. So that's pretty much it. The next module is we're going to talk about qualifying the prospect in chapter 23 and how to screen the good prospects from bad. And that will help you to protect your valuable time and prevent you from wasting time with bad prospects.